What's good? It's Woog. I wanted to talk a moment about a very important album that just dropped in a genre that normally doesn't get a ton of mainstream coverage, and the reason why this album and its reception is important. And that album is by a bit of a super group. It's basically a jazz trio between Arooj Aftab, Vijay Iyer, and Shahzad Ismaily. And this is a collab between those three artists, and that album is Love in Exile. Now, I would say that this is a ambient jazz album. Now, Vijay Iyer, he's the one out of these three who has the deepest jazz background. He's one of these guys who has like fellowships and a lifetime appointment as a professor of the arts at Harvard University. He's about as distinguished a musician as it gets. And then you've got Shahzad Ismaily, who is a self-taught multi-instrumentalist. He's worked with everybody from Laraji to other jazz and ambient and kind of experimental progressive artists. And, you know, he's just a part of that New York art and art music scene. And then you have Arooj Aftab, who probably has the most crossover success in her relatively short career. Now, the reason I was saying that this is important is because if you look at the genres that this Love in Exile music and its respective artists are coming from, I feel like jazz has kind of taken on, and this has been happening over the decades, several decades now. It has the reputation of being somewhat unapproachable. It's almost like a type of music that comes with the stigma of, like, you've got to be a certain level of knowledgeable, or you've got to be trained in this and this to even understand jazz. And if you haven't done that, don't even come close. And so I feel like jazz's reputation kind of pushes people away, while the actual practitioners of jazz will tell you, like, no. This is as approachable as it gets. Come in with no knowledge. You don't have to be a trained musician or have some sort of a classical composition base of knowledge to really understand or to feel jazz. But I feel like because of its reputation, most people don't even bother really getting into it. Well, when you have an artist like Arooj Aftab, who I would say is a bit more ambient than jazz. Now, there are differences as well as some similarities because both ambient and jazz have so many different layers and varied styles within those genres. And I feel like we're kind of hitting a point where ambient music and its different derivatives, you've got like environmental ambient, you've got ambient jazz, you have different styles, you've got different levels of minimalism, and you've got some ambient where it's just textures and not even as musical as other forms of ambient. So with jazz and ambient, I feel like it's starting to get a little more coverage, and certain albums are getting spotlit in a way where they weren't before. Like, I remember a few years ago, I remember seeing, Tim Hecker and 106 Point Never cracking a lot of, like Pitchfork's top 50 albums of the year. And, 106 Point Never, who's a little bit more glitchy in the ambient realm, he produced the Last Weekend album. Like, one of the best and biggest albums of 2022 was produced by somebody who you could classify as an ambient artist, even though, again, it's a little bit more glitchy with 106 Point Never. But Arooj Aftab dropped an album in 2021 called Vulture Prince, and that was one of the rare ambient albums that makes a lot of top 50 lists. So, you've got like the classical ambient artists like Brian Eno, who's kind of like the godfather of ambient, even though even he looks to his predecessors, who would be like Eric Satie, John Cage, even like Philip Glass, different names like that. Well, you've had different branches of ambient music occur since. Well, Arooj Aftab is labeled a Sufi artist, but I feel like that's almost a lazy classification. And in her recent interview with Pitchfork, she explained why it's a little bit annoying for her to be classified as Sufi or Neo-Sufi simply because, she comes from Saudi Arabia. She's a Pakistani from Saudi Arabia. So there's like this tendency to lump people in with the different categories of music from their native lands. And it used to just be a blanket categorization, and it was called world music back in the day. But there's so many different nuances to these these different styles that Arooj Aftab, Vijay Iyer, and Shahzad Ismaily just want you to hear the album without thinking too hard about how do I classify this, because Vijay Iyer, again, he's the one with the deepest jazz background. He performs in trios, he performs in sextets. Go ahead and look at his discography. I like listening to a lot of Vijay Iyer's music, but this particular collaboration between Arooj Aftab, Vijay Iyer, and Shahzad Ismaily is a little bit less jazzy. It's not as busy as some of Vijay Iyer's other music. I would say this one trends more towards ambient. But again, that Arooj Aftab 2021 album, Vulture Prince, I feel like that was another important kind of leveling up in terms of how the music media is treating ambient music and similar genres. I mean, last year you had Duval Timothy, you had his album, ranked in a lot of like top 50 lists, and there were a lot of ambient leanings in that music. And you recently had, the kind of new jazz duo, these child prodigies, Dami and JD Beck. You had their album pretty heralded and spotlit in some of those lists as well. I mean, Arooj Aftab and Dami and JD Beck, they were both up for the Grammy for Best New Artist. Arooj Aftab in 2022, and then most recently Dami and JD Beck just a couple months ago in this past Grammy. So you're starting to see more of these artists kind of break through into the greater public consciousness. But I would definitely urge you to get into this Love in Exile album. I hope that it does well. I hope that it continues to get good critical acclaim, and also listen to all three of those artists, individual music and some of their other collabs that they've had respectively. I mean, Shahzad Ismaily, he's collabed with everybody from Colin Stetson to Bob Dylan to Yoko Ono. Like, this guy has pretty much traveled the world just studying music in Pakistan, Turkey, India, Japan, Indonesia, Mexico, Morocco, Iceland. Like, this is somebody who, again, is self-trained, but they are about as respected as it gets. And then Vijay Iyer, again, he's the one who's got the deep jazz pedigree. So this is a very interesting trio. And, I've listened to this album a couple times and I like it a lot. Yes, there are albums by each one of those three artists that I prefer more than this collab album, but this would be a good starting point because you could kind of get a taste of, not only ambient music, but kind of the jazzier leanings of certain types of ambient music. Arooj Aftab is the vocalist. I mean, she's a musician as well, but she's providing the vocals on this album. And then again, you can't go wrong with Shahzad and Vijay Iyer, who are, they're composers, they're engineers, they're producers, and they are multi-instrumentalists. So yeah, this is kind of like a heavy hitting supergroup trio that just hit us with the Love in Exile album. So give that a look. And again, I feel like this is an important release, and I feel like, budding careers like Arooj Aftab's are very important because they start to garner more attention towards these otherwise somewhat underlooked, or I would say underappreciated genres and subgenres. But yeah, let me know if you are already into ambient music. To be honest, I listen to probably more ambient and jazz these days than most other genres. But yeah, if you are a fan of ambient music, who are some of your favorites? Like recently, I've been listening to like Mary Lattimore. I've been listening to Greenhouse. She's got a very good Music for Living Spaces album from a couple years ago. I like M. Geddes Gangras, Tim Hecker. I mean, there's so many different good artists in that ambient realm, and they have so many different styles. Some of it's more calming, some of it's more atmospheric, like Gas. That's one. But yeah, if you have heard ambient, let me know who you like. Let me know if you're familiar with any one of these three artists in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you love music like I do. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.